In the current combat zone, the Donetsk region is experiencing significant activity, while Kursk plays a crucial role in operations across the border. This week, we've witnessed how Russian forces have ramped up their pressure on Pokrovsk while advancing towards the Ukrainian stronghold of Buldar. The situation is increasingly dire, and there is much at stake. As of Sunday, September 15th, Ukrainian forces have intensified their actions against Russian forces, including ambushes and counterattacks. Following these operations, Russian forces suffered a heavy blow, with 46 armored vehicles destroyed in an ambush by Ukrainian forces. To better understand how this operation unfolded and what led to it, we will break it down. Our mission is to provide the latest information from the front lines, where the Russian army is currently facing severe difficulties in Pokrovsk. Additionally, we'll discuss the new strategies their forces are implementing under these challenging circumstances. To show your support, make sure to click the subscribe button, turn on notifications, and give us a thumbs up. Let's get to it. The organized operation was carried out by the 2nd Separate Special Purpose Battalion, the 46th Separate Airborne Brigade, and the 59th Separate Motorized Infantry Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. The objective was to engage a column of Russian armored vehicles heading towards the settlement of Ostry in the Donetsk region. The goal was to successfully complete the mission, which resulted in the destruction of 46 Russian Army armored vehicles. The operation was a success. There are some intense images of the operation from the Hetman Bogdan Khmelnytsky Brigade that were posted on their Telegram account. A relentless combined artillery fire attack decisively stopped a formidable Russian column made up of 46 tanks, armored personnel carriers, and infantry fighting vehicles. The footage captures the moment this event occurred as the Russians advanced in a massive column toward Ukrainian trenches. Ukrainian defenders said they spotted the enemy in time and were ready to confront and neutralize the threat, thanks to the sharp eyes of reconnaissance drone operators. As we approach the front lines of the Ukrainian armed forces, our unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, are conducting precise strikes on Russian armored vehicles. The intensity of the operation is palpable at this moment, as tremendous artillery fire completely destroyed the armored vehicles, captured on video. Within seconds, the lead tanks were engulfed in flames. If you watch the footage, you'll see how Ukrainian forces were able to destroy that Russian armored convoy through highly coordinated operations. This is an impressive display of strategy. The situation for Russian troops in Pokrovsk was far from ideal. For about 2 weeks now, movement towards Pokrovsk has come to a complete halt. Despite no advances, losses in this sector continue to mount significantly. This month, the Ukrainian army has deployed at least 2 combat-ready brigades to Pokrovsk, likely to bolster ammunition supplies for the units now involved in critical operations. The results were evident to everyone present. During the 2 weeks following the fall of Avdiivka on February 17, 2024, Russian military forces experienced a pause in their advance toward Pokrovsk. This pause occurred after they had been making steady progress at the front. The Russian army has suffered setbacks, and the situation in the Kursk region is becoming more complicated. The Russians launched a surprise counteroffensive against Ukrainian forces in the Kursk Oblast nearly a week ago, and the circumstances are rapidly changing. Each action taken on the ground matters. However, it wasn't entirely a surprise for Ukraine. The Russians aimed to lure well-equipped troops away from the conflict in Ukraine and back into their own country. Last week, the Russians finally took the bait, following the deployment of troops from Kaliningrad and the infamous TikTok Chechen warriors, known for posing with dual machine guns. Russia has pulled a significant number of its elite battalions out of Ukraine and redeployed them to Kursk. This move is a consequence of earlier actions. For the past 2 years, the dynamics of battlefield operations in Ukraine have remained largely unchanged. The use of operational surprise as a primary tactic is essential if large areas are to be gained. Those first 100 hours are crucial. If you don't seize that opportunity, you'll have to fight for every inch, battling upstream and finding it very difficult to advance. During the first 100 hours following the start of the Russian army's counteroffensive in Kursk, they failed to achieve any tactical advances. The Russian military command has ordered its soldiers to advance south of the Sime River along 2 critical routes. Russian sources have reported offensive operations launched against Ukraine's critical western flank in the Kursk Oblast. These actions have been carried out by the 155th Separate Marine Infantry Brigade, the 106th Airborne Division, and the 56th Air Assault Regiment of the 7th Air Assault Division. Some Russian troops successfully crossed the Sime River to initiate an offensive from the west, while another unit advanced from the north. The Russians have taken control of a large number of villages and settlements along the river and beyond their territory. However, all the land they claim remains contested. A high-ranking Russian officer determined that the Ukrainian fortifications in the Kursk Oblast were vulnerable, indicating that the time was right to capitalize on this advantage. This assessment was made as the Russian counteroffensive gained momentum. As part of a strategic maneuver, Russian forces moved their troops to Kursk after withdrawing them from the Pokrovsk region, where they had been stalled during the conflict.
Russian military reports indicate fluctuations in the number of troops stationed in Kursk. Initially, they declared an increase from 10,000 to approximately 70,000, followed by a reduction to 30,000, and now the number has returned to 70,000. Russian military leaders believed this number would exceed 100,000 at one point. Imagine yourself as a Ukrainian strategist. It's absolutely necessary for Russia to relocate its forces away from ineffective front lines. Prepare to launch an attack on Kursk, bringing a large amount of weaponry to destroy any bridges the Russians attempt to build over the Sime River. Successfully achieving this objective, in addition to capturing nearly 3,000 enemy soldiers, Ukraine has gained full control of the river's southern banks, securing a strategic advantage. Time and again, the Russians fail in their attempts to cross the river, constantly being blocked. If you want to reinforce the Russian presence in Kursk, your new goal is to devise strategies and implement them immediately. First, the situation in Ukraine has caused the Russians to advance their deployment without hesitation. Russian forces walked right into a trap, sending their troops into a battlefield fraught with ambiguity. The Russians made a tactical error in this situation, and the final outcome won't be materially changed, even if Russian forces manage to gain full control of the village of Krasny Bresko and the surrounding territory, unless Ukraine withdraws from the area, allowing the Russians to take control of the situation on this front. Ukraine plans to take decisive action. The construction of a bridge to cross the river may give the Russians the impression that they hold the upper hand. An important factor to consider is the location of the river, which lies less than 50 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. Even if Russian forces succeed in building the bridge and crossing it, it remains unclear how long they can maintain control over that position. The situation could turn into a stalemate for the Russian military if they deploy tens of thousands of troops and the Ukrainian forces order their air force to strike the bridge, escalating the situation further. In these circumstances, Russian forces would be forced to maintain a narrow corridor across the river, relying entirely on a limited land route with the river behind them and advancing Ukrainian forces in front of them. The Ukrainian army will have full command and authority over the territory. Given the current circumstances, it is highly unlikely that the Kremlin can replenish the more than 10,000 Russian troops currently stationed on the opposite bank of the river. The Kremlin's approach seems to be based on a steadfast commitment to reinforcing resources in the sector, especially after securing their position on the southern flank of the Sime River. However, after the Russians crossed the river, Ukraine did not stand idly by. These foreign forces penetrated the Russian border from the southern and western fronts. Despite likely being aware of the dangers associated with their strategy, the Russians still fell into a trap. In our view, Russia is positioned to advance, confident that Ukraine lacks the military power to organize a decisive response. The policy they've adopted demonstrates their intention to push back the Ukrainians before the West begins to relax its control over long-range weaponry. It appears that Russia's chances of victory are slim. The long-range missiles being used by the Ukrainian military are the decisive factor in this situation. The strategy Russia is using to confront Ukrainian soldiers in Kursk is both strategic and tactical. The Kremlin, however, will not be able to continue with this plan indefinitely. Every day, greater quantities of Western military aid are being sent to the Ukrainian armed forces. Moreover, the decision made by military commanders to deploy ATACMS and Storm Shadow missiles on Russian territory marks a substantial strategic shift. This demonstrates a greater awareness of the need to arm Ukraine to combat Russian forces, even though doing so increases the potential for conflict escalation. Meanwhile, Ukrainian Army Commander Oleksandr Syrsky stated that Russian forces haven't advanced a single meter in the crucial Pokrovsk region over the last 6 days. However, our Ukrainian allies have noted that this statement contains some inaccuracies, though it does align with the Kremlin's narrative that the summer offensive in eastern Ukraine is losing momentum in the face of fierce resistance. In a recent interview with CNN, Syrsky reported that his forces are strategically concentrating reserves in the Pokrovsk region. He emphasized that Ukrainian troops are holding their positions and noted a slowdown in the pace of Russian attacks. "We are executing every possible strategy to hold Pokrovsk. Over the past 6 days, we have strengthened our defensive capabilities in the region, and the enemy has made no progress toward Pokrovsk, as confirmed by Syrsky. The volume of artillery fire and the intensity of the assault have significantly decreased. For our team, the Pokrovsk sector remains the most challenging front we face." In the context of the Ukrainian military, the term sector
refers to a specific area focused on a key city or notable geographic feature, along with the road and rail networks that facilitate movement, whether advancing or retreating, within that zone. In May, Russia launched a large-scale offensive in Ukraine's eastern Donbass region. Progress has been gradual, advancing along multiple routes toward Pokrovsk, a key logistical and industrial hub that had a population of 76,000 before the conflict. Pokrovsk is one of the Kremlin's key objectives among the major cities in Donbass that it aims to capture as part of its strategic offensive to occupy and annex the Ukrainian regions of Luhansk and Donetsk during the summer of 2022. Since August, Russian offensives directed at the city of Pokrovsk have shifted from the southeast to the northwest, advancing along a key railway line and the parallel E50 highway. Independent military information platforms are closely monitoring the situation in Ukraine. The last confirmed Russian advance along the two routes in the narrow 57 kilometers, 35 miles, offensive sector aimed at Pokrovsk occurred on August 27. This advance was marked by the capture of the village of Novogradiv after a fierce 5-day battle. Syrsky's statement on September 5 that not a meter had been gained was largely accurate for that specific offensive route. However, multiple sources have verified that the Russian offensive has expanded the salient around Pokrovsk in other areas, which, at least technically, contradicts Syrsky's claim to CNN that Kremlin forces have not moved closer to capturing the city for nearly a week. Reports from the independent monitoring platform Deep State indicate that Russia has made its most significant advances in Ukraine's Donbass region since August 26. These movements occurred around 12 to 15 kilometers, 7.5 to 9.3 miles, south of the area where Syrsky reported to CNN that Russian offensives had completely stalled. From September 3 to 5, Kremlin ground forces, backed by artillery and air support, launched strategic assaults, successfully taking the rural village of Volka and advancing toward the village of Ukraine. According to reports from these platforms, both sides have acknowledged the Russian forces' achievements. Kremlin-backed military correspondent Denis Chukin reported via his Telegram channel, RyVRZ, that Russian forces had secured a section of territory measuring between 2 kilometers, 1.2 miles, and 3.2 kilometers, 2 miles, in width. Frontline reports indicate that Ukraine's 2nd Special Forces Battalion, which previously served in the Presidential Brigade, fiercely engaged in the area to thwart further Russian advances. On Friday, they successfully held their positions against enemy efforts. Although not a direct route to Pokrovsk, recent Russian local successes in Lysva and Ukraine have expanded a 25 kilometers, 16-mile bulge that Russian forces have secured in the Donbass region over the past 2 months. This development increases the risk that larger forces could encircle the south or seize control of the town of Kov, near Pokrovsk. Syrsky's optimistic statements to CNN about the lack of breakthroughs overlooked concerning recent developments on the southern front of that bulge, raising fears about Ukraine's situation on the direct route to Pokrovsk. Last Friday, we witnessed new Russian offensives and intense fighting near the village of Halytsinifa. Initial unverified reports from the front lines indicate that Kiev's forces are holding their position. The reports suggest that Syrsky and his team relocated at least 5 combat brigades from various fronts or reserves to the Pokrovsk sector last week. However, the strength of these troops remains uncertain. On Friday, official Ukrainian army reports indicated that combat operations in the Pokrovsk sector were ongoing. Ukrainian forces successfully repelled 37 ground assaults and participated in roughly half of the 181 firefights that occurred near Pokrovsk and the adjacent town of Kov across the entire conflict front in the Kursk region. Ukrainian political scientist Kyrylo Sanov, an army officer since 2022, shared his thoughts in a YouTube interview on September 4. He highlighted that Russian assaults on Pokrovsk have inflicted significant losses on their side while acknowledging that Ukrainian forces have executed tactical withdrawals. He firmly stated that there has not been, nor will there be, a Russian breakthrough in the Pokrovsk sector. The Russians are advancing, but we refer to their progress as 2 houses a day, Sazonov declared. The situation is far from critical. The operational front is constantly shrinking. It's clear the resources they're targeting are insufficient for any substantial progress. On Friday, Russian military commentator Alexei Shov took to Telegram to claim that Ukrainian defenses were on the verge of a significant breach east of Pokrovsk. The central group of forces, led by General Andrei Morbich, is conducting operations with notable precision. The liberation of Pokrovsk will force several fortified positions of the Ukrainian armed forces to surrender quickly, Shov declared. That same Friday, Serhiy Dobak, a senior official of the Donetsk Regional Police, reported that Russian forces had intensified their airstrikes on civilian areas beyond the conflict line. That day, Russian attack aircraft targeted the cities of Pokrovsk and Kyiv, as well as the villages of Ganka-Vali and Dobr-Pilk. 2 adults were injured, and several houses and apartments were hit. By noon, thousands of electricity consumers remained without power, according to Dobak. He urged residents of Pokrovsk to evacuate the city while they still could. Ukselnaya, Ukraine's national railway operator, announced that rail services to the city would be suspended from September 11th due to concerns over the security situation. On Thursday, Vanishes, head of the Donetsk region, announced that the endpoint of the railway line would be relocated to the city of Pavlograd. According to him, about 26,000 people remain in Pokrovsk. What are your thoughts on the current situation? Share your opinions with us in the comments section below. Crew, your support is greatly appreciated. Soldiers, it's essential that you hit the subscribe button, turn on notifications, and give us a thumbs up to show your support.